The day I walked into that police station, my hands wouldn't stop trembling, and the smell of stale coffee and bleach in the air made my stomach turn. I had practiced what I would say in the rearview mirror the whole drive over, my voice a shaky whisper against the roar of my own heartbeat. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold that settled in my bones when I pushed through those heavy glass doors, the ghost of last night's bruise already blooming a sickly yellow beneath my foundation. I was Linda, a mother of two from a nice house on Maple Crest Drive, a woman who organized the school book fair and always had a casserole ready for a new neighbor, and I was there to report my husband, Michael, the man I'd loved since I was 19 years old, for throwing a dinner plate at my head so hard it shattered against the wall behind me, showering our toddler's high chair with jagged pieces of ceramic. The officer at the front desk, a man with a name tag that read Miller and eyes the color of a winter sky, didn't look up from his computer screen as I approached, my sensible flats squeaking on the polished linoleum. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone bored, flat, devoid of any of the urgency I felt screaming in my veins. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat like a fishhook. "My name is Linda Carter. I need to file a report. My husband, he assaulted me last night." The words felt foreign and heavy, tasting of betrayal and shame. Finally, Officer Miller looked up, his gaze sweeping over me, from my neatly styled brown hair down to my clean, if slightly worn sweater. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the quick assessment that didn't seem to find what it was looking for. "Assaulted you how, ma'am?" he asked, pulling a form towards him with a sigh that seemed to say, "Here we go again." "He threw a plate at me," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "During an argument. It missed, but it was the intent, you know? The fear. And it's not the first time. There's a pattern." I thought of the other things, the smaller things he dismissed as him just being passionate, the way he'd grab my arm a little too tight when he was drunk, the way he'd punch the wall next to my head, the names he'd call me that left bruises on the inside. Officer Miller's pen stilled. "A pattern," he repeated, not as a question but as a statement. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "You said it missed, so no visible injuries?" I instinctively touched my cheek where the foundation was caked on, hiding the shadow of his grip from 2 days prior. "Not from last night, no, but—" He cut me off, his voice taking on a patronizing, almost paternal tone that made my skin crawl. "Linda? Can I call you Linda? Look, I've been doing this a long time. Marriages, they have their ups and downs, heated arguments. People say and do things they regret. You seem like a sensible woman. Is dragging your husband, the father of your children, through the system really the answer here? These domestic disputes, they're messy. They're he said, she said. Without any real evidence, without a serious injury, there's not much we can do. It'll just be your word against his." The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't the script I had practiced. This was a door slamming shut in my face. "My word against his?" I echoed, disbelief making my voice thin. "He threw a plate at me in our own kitchen. My 5-year-old son, Timmy, saw the whole thing. He cried himself to sleep." Officer Miller gave a slow, weary shake of his head. "Kids, they get upset. It doesn't necessarily prove anything. And a thrown plate that didn't even connect? A good defense attorney would have that tossed out before lunch. You'd be wasting everyone's time, including your own. Maybe you should just go home, cool off, talk to him when things are calmer. Have you considered marriage counseling?" I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This was the betrayal I hadn't anticipated, the one that cut deeper than Michael's rage. It was the system, the very people who were supposed to protect me, looking at my neatly presented life and deciding my pain wasn't valid enough, my terror wasn't official enough. I was being managed, not helped.
Just then, another officer, younger, with a sharper gaze, walked over and leaned against the desk. "Everything okay, Bill?" he asked Officer Miller. Miller gestured a thumb towards me. "Lady wants to file a report on her husband. Says he threw a plate." The younger officer, whose tag read Davies, looked me up and down, a faint, dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "What'd you do? Burn his dinner?" he chuckled, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the sterile room. The air left my lungs. I felt myself shrinking, becoming small and invisible, the way I did when Michael was in one of his moods. This was it. This was the wall. They saw a hysterical wife, a nuisance, not a victim. I was about to turn and flee, the shame a hot wave washing over me, when the front doors hissed open again. And there he was, Michael. He stood there, framed in the doorway, not with the contorted mask of anger I'd left at home, but with a face of profound, practiced concern. He was holding a single, perfect pink rose. My blood ran cold. "Linda, honey," he said, his voice a low, soothing baritone that dripped with false worry. "I've been so worried. I came as soon as I got your note." He walked towards me, completely ignoring the two officers, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a threat. He reached out, and I flinched, a movement so instinctual, so telling, that both officers saw it. But Michael just smiled, a sad, gentle smile, and tucked the rose into the strap of my purse. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get you the help you need." Officer Miller stood up, his demeanor shifting entirely. Now he was looking at a concerned, loving husband dealing with an unstable wife. "Sir, is everything all right?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, the picture of a weary, devoted man. "Officers, I'm so sorry for the trouble. My wife, she hasn't been herself lately. Postpartum depression after our second. It's been a real struggle. She gets these ideas, these fits. I must not have locked the door when I left for work this morning." He looked at me with such convincing pity that for a terrifying second, I almost believed his story myself. Officer Davies nodded, his earlier smirk replaced with a look of understanding. "We see it all the time, sir. It's tough on families." I stood there, paralyzed, my mouth agape, as my husband, my abuser, smoothly and expertly dismantled my reality in front of the very people I had run to for salvation. He had not only found me, he had followed me, and he was now using their biases as his own personal weapons, turning my cry for help into a symptom of my supposed illness. The rose in my purse felt like a snake, its thorns digging into the fabric of my life, poisoning everything.
I stood frozen, the weight of Michael's lie pressing down on me like a physical force, as Officer Miller nodded sympathetically at him, completely taken in by the performance. "We understand, sir. It's a difficult situation for everyone," Miller said, his voice now gentle, as if speaking to a child. I wanted to scream, to shatter the delicate glass prison Michael was building around me right there in the lobby. But the words were trapped in my throat, choked by a lifetime of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic. Michael's hand closed around my upper arm, his grip firm and possessive, hidden from the officer's view by the angle of his body. "Let's get you home, Linda. You need to rest," he said, his tone dripping with a faux tenderness that made my skin crawl. I could feel the implicit threat in his fingers, a reminder of the bruises hidden beneath my sleeve. Officer Davies gave a curt nod. "You take care of her now, and maybe look into some professional help." The dismissal in his voice was the final nail in the coffin of my hope. I was being handed back to my abuser by the very people sworn to protect me, wrapped in a ribbon of concern and a poisonous rose. Michael led me out of the police station, his stride confident, his posture that of a weary hero. The bright sunlight outside felt obscene, mocking the darkness that had just swallowed me whole. He didn't say a word until he had bundled me into the passenger seat of his car, the door closing with a soft, definitive click that sounded like a cell door slamming shut.
As he walked around to the driver's side, I stared at the rose, now lying on the floor mat, its perfect petals a vile parody of love. When he got in, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove for a few blocks before he finally spoke, his voice low and devoid of its earlier performative warmth. "You embarrassed me, Linda. You embarrassed us." I stared straight ahead at the familiar streets of our town, each house, each tree a testament to the normal life I was supposed to be living. "I was scared," I whispered, the words feeling pathetic even to my own ears. He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Scared? Of what? Me? I would never hurt you, Linda. You know that. You get these ideas in your head. You need to learn to control your emotions." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, it was like a dance we had performed 1,000 times. I closed my eyes, fighting the dizzying sensation of my own reality being rewritten. "The plate, Michael! You threw a plate at my head!" He sighed, as if explaining something to a stubborn child. "It was an accident, Linda. I was upset and my hand slipped. You were yelling, you remember? You were working yourself up into a state. I was just trying to calm you down." He reached over and patted my knee, a gesture that made me flinch. "It's okay. We're going to go home and we're going to forget this ever happened. You'll see the doctor next week, we'll get you some medication for your anxiety, and everything will go back to normal."
The word normal felt like a death sentence. Normal was walking on eggshells, was flinching at sudden movements, was teaching my son, Timmy, that sometimes daddy gets loud and it's best to be very quiet. We pulled into the driveway of our 2-story colonial, the house I had once been so proud of, now feeling like a beautifully decorated cage. The moment the front door closed behind us, the mask slipped completely. Michael's face hardened, his eyes turning to chips of flint. "Go upstairs," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't want to see you for the rest of the day, and you will not speak to the children about this. Do you understand me?" I nodded, my body moving on autopilot. The fight drained out of me. I climbed the stairs, each step heavy with defeat, and slipped into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I leaned against it, listening to the sounds of my home, the distant hum of the television, the gentle patter of my daughter Sarah's footsteps in the playroom, and I felt a sob rise in my chest, but I choked it back. I couldn't let the children hear. I couldn't let them know that their mother had tried and failed to save them. An hour later, I heard the front door open and close again, Michael leaving, probably to go to the gym to work off his anger. The house was quiet. I crept out of the room and went to check on Sarah, who was napping peacefully in her crib, her cherubic face untouched by the chaos of our world. Then I went to Timmy's room. He was sitting on the floor, building a tower with colorful blocks, but he looked up as I entered, his little face serious. "Mommy, is Daddy still mad?" he asked, his voice small. The question shattered what was left of my heart. I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, breathing in the clean little boy scent of him. "No, honey, Daddy's not mad," I lied, the taste of it bitter on my tongue. "Everything is okay." But as I held my son, I knew with a terrifying clarity that nothing was okay. The police wouldn't help me. Michael had convinced them I was crazy. I was alone, trapped in this house with a man who could switch from charming to cruel in a heartbeat, and the only witnesses were my children. The rose from my purse was now sitting on the kitchen counter, a constant, silent reminder of how thoroughly I had been betrayed. And as I looked at it, a new, fierce determination began to kindle deep within me, a tiny flame of defiance that refused to be extinguished. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. But as I held my son, I made a silent promise to him, to Sarah, to myself. I would find a way out, no matter what it took. That tiny flame of defiance flickered in the darkness of my fear, a fragile but stubborn light that refused to go out even as I heard Michael's car return an hour later, his heavy footsteps on the porch making my heart hammer against my ribs. I was in the kitchen, mechanically preparing dinner.
Meatloaf and mashed potatoes, his favorite. The ordinary motions, a shield against the storm I knew was coming. He walked in, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, and he didn't look at me. Just dropped the bag by the door and went to the sink to wash his hands. The silence was heavier than any shouting, a loaded thing that filled the room with unspoken threats. I kept my eyes on the potatoes I was mashing, the rhythmic thud, 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 a pathetic attempt to calm my nerves. It was Timmy who broke the tension, padding into the kitchen in his socked feet and asking if he could watch cartoons. Michael turned then, his face softening into a smile for our son, a transformation so seamless it was chilling. "Sure, buddy, go ahead," he said, his voice warm, and as Timmy scampered off, his eyes met mine over the boy's head, and in that flat, cold gaze I saw the message clear as day. See? This is how it's supposed to be. Don't ruin it. After dinner, after the kids were bathed and read to and tucked into bed, the real reckoning began. Michael sat across from me on the living room sofa, the television muted, and he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "We need to talk about what happened today, Linda," he said, his tone deceptively calm. I clenched my hands in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. "I went to the police because I was afraid," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, as if considering this. "I know you were, but that's the problem, Linda. Your fear, it makes you irrational. It makes you see monsters where there are none." He reached out and took my hand, his grip tight, almost painful. "I am not a monster. I am your husband. I love you. But you need help. I've made an appointment for you with Dr. Evans on Thursday. He's a psychiatrist. He can give you something for this anxiety of yours." The world tilted again. Dr. Evans was an old friend of Michael's from college. I'd met him at parties. This wasn't about help. This was about control, about getting a professional to label me as unstable to cement his narrative. I felt the walls closing in, but I forced myself to nod, to play along. "Okay," I whispered, knowing that any resistance now would only make things worse. A small, treacherous part of me wondered if he was right, if I was going crazy, but then I remembered the plate shattering against the wall, the terror in Timmy's eyes, and the flame inside me burned a little brighter. The next few days were a study in tense normalcy. Michael was overly attentive, watching my every move, listening to my phone calls, not that I had anyone to call. My friends had slowly drifted away over the years, discouraged by Michael's subtle put-downs or his habit of scheduling conflicting plans. My family lived across the country, and our calls were always brief, superficial, with me carefully editing out the cracks in my perfect life. I was utterly alone, but for the first time, I began to see my isolation not as a prison, but as an advantage. He had no one to watch me but himself. My chance came on Wednesday, the day before my appointment with Dr. Evans. Michael had a late meeting at work, a rare occurrence he denounced with a pointed look, as if warning me not to misuse the time. After I dropped Timmy at kindergarten and put Sarah down for her nap, I stood in the silent house, my pulse racing. This was it. I went to the hall closet, to the old winter coat I hadn't worn in years, and I felt in the pocket for the secret I'd hidden there after we first moved in. A prepaid debit card I'd bought with grocery cash years ago, just in case, and a folded piece of paper with a number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline I'd copied from a poster in a public library bathroom. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper. This was my lifeline. I retreated to the bathroom, the one room in the house without windows, and locked the door. Sitting on the closed lid of the toilet, I dialed the number on my cell phone, each digit feeling like an act of treason. A woman's voice answered, calm and steady. "National Domestic Violence Hotline. How can I help you?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words stuck in my throat. I need help. I finally choked out, and then the whole story came pouring out in a rushed, hushed whisper. The plate, the police, the rose, the psychiatrist, the terrifying feeling of being erased in my own life. The woman, who said her name was Chloe, listened without judgment, her quiet, "I believe you,"
a ball on my soul. She told me about safety planning, about gathering important documents, about stashing a go bag, about finding a safe place to go. "You are not alone," she said, and I wept silent, grateful tears. We made a plan. I would go to my appointment tomorrow, I would play the part, but I would start gathering what I needed. I would find a way to get to a women's shelter in the next county over, a place called Haven House that Chloe told me about. When I hung up, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I had a map, however faint, out of this darkness. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. That evening, as I was clearing the dinner dishes, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother-in-law, Patricia. "Just checking in, dear. Michael said you haven't been feeling well. Let me know if you need anything." My blood ran cold. Patricia adored Michael, her only son, and saw him as a perfect, devoted husband and father. She had never liked me much, thought I wasn't good enough for her boy. If Michael was already spreading the story of my instability to his mother, it meant he was building a case, ensuring that if I ever did try to leave, no one would believe me. It was another layer of the cage, and I felt the walls grow thicker. I typed back a cheerful reply, "I'm fine, just a little tired, thanks for checking," and dropped the phone like it was a live wire. The twist of fear in my gut was a sharp reminder that the path to freedom was littered with invisible traps, and one misstep could bring it all crashing down. The cheerful reply I'd sent to Patricia felt like a lie etched into my skin, and the rest of the evening passed in a haze of manufactured normalcy. My smile a stiff, painful mask as I read Timmy his bedtime story and hummed lullabies to Sarah. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car headlights sweeping across the ceiling sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Michael watched me, his gaze a quiet, assessing wait, and I knew he was looking for cracks, for any sign that the compliant wife was a facade. I made sure to give him none, keeping my movements calm, my voice soft, my eyes downcast. When we went to bed, he fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even, while I lay rigid beside him, staring into the darkness, the hotline number and the words Haven House repeating in my mind like a mantra, a secret prayer against the despair. The next morning, the day of my appointment with Dr. Evans, dawned gray and heavy with rain. Michael announced he would drive me himself. He'd taken the morning off work to support me. The car ride was silent, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the hammering of my own heart. He walked me right to the door of the sleek, modern medical building, his hand a firm pressure on the small of my back. "I'll be right here waiting when you're done," he said, his voice low in my ear. It wasn't a reassurance, it was a sentence. Dr. Evans's office was all soft lighting and expensive leather, and he greeted me with a warm, professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Linda, it's good to see you," he said, gesturing to the plush chair across from his desk. "Michael is very worried about you." And there it was, the bias, laid bare in the first 30 seconds. I played my part, just as the hotline advocate, Chloe, and I had discussed. I spoke in vague terms about feeling overwhelmed, about anxiety, about sometimes feeling afraid for no reason. I carefully edited out the plates, the bruises, the terror. I was the fragile, unstable woman Michael needed me to be. Dr. Evans nodded, taking notes, and suggested a mild anti-anxiety medication. "It should take the edge off," he said, scribbling a prescription. "And it might help with these irrational fears you've been having." I took the slip of paper, my hands steady, though my soul was screaming. This piece of paper was his validation, his proof. As I stood to leave, Dr. Evans looked at me over his glasses. "Michael is a good man, Linda. A very good man. He just wants his wife back." I felt a cold fury rise in my chest, so potent it stole my breath. I simply nodded and walked out, the prescription feeling like a brand in my hand. Michael was indeed waiting in the lobby, his face a mask of concern. "How did it go?" he asked, taking my arm. "It was helpful," I lied, my voice meek. "Dr. Evans gave me this." I handed him the prescription. He looked at it, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. It was the look of a man who had just checkmated his opponent. "Good," he said, tucking the paper into his breast pocket. "I'll have this filled for you on the way home." In that moment, any last lingering doubt I had about leaving was incinerated. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to medicate me into submission, to chemically erase the parts of me that resisted him. We picked up the prescription, the little orange bottle a new shackle, and returned home. The rain had stopped, leaving the world looking washed and new, a cruel contrast to the rot festering inside our house. The rest of the day was a blur of domestic chores, but my mind was racing, planning. While Michael was distracted on a work call in his study, I slipped into our bedroom and, with trembling hands, began to gather the bare essentials. I took my passport, Timmy and Sarah's birth certificates, and my social security card from the locked box in the closet. Michael kept the key on his key ring, but I had found the spare taped to the bottom of his desk drawer years ago during a deep clean. I folded them into a Ziploc bag and hid them inside a box of tampons under the sink. It was a start, a go bag. I would need clothes, money, a plan. But the first, most dangerous steps had been taken. The following day, a Saturday, brought another unexpected twist. The doorbell rang mid-morning, and when I answered it, Patricia stood there, holding a bakery box and wearing a determined smile. "I thought you could use some company and a decent pastry," she announced, sweeping past me into the foyer. My blood turned to ice. Michael came out of the kitchen, his expression of mild surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, giving her a hug. "I told you I was coming," she said lightly, her eyes scanning the living room, taking in every detail. "You look pale, dear. Are you eating?" It was an invasion. An inspection. Michael had sent for his top general, and the battle for my sanity, for my very identity, had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. Patricia was here to corroborate his story, to bear witness to my decline, and her presence in my house felt more threatening than any thrown plate ever could. The smell of the pastries, rich with butter and sugar, filled the kitchen, but it might as well have been the scent of gunpowder. Patricia moved through my home with a proprietary air, opening drawers to find a serving plate, peering into the refrigerator as if taking inventory. "You need to keep your strength up, Linda," she clucked, arranging the danishes on a platter. Michael hovered, the picture of a grateful son, and I could see the silent communication passing between them, a shared concern for the fragile woman who was causing so much trouble. I poured coffee with a steady hand, my smile nailed into place. But inside, every nerve was screaming. This was a tribunal, and I was the defendant without counsel. We sat at the kitchen table, the bright, cheerful room, feeling like a stage set for a play about a happy family. Patricia took a delicate bite of a cheese Danish. "So, Michael tells me you've been having a difficult time," she began, her tone syrupy with false sympathy. "These early years with children are so hard. I remember I had a touch of the blues myself after Michael was born." She was rewriting my reality again, downgrading my terror to the blues. I took a sip of coffee, the liquid scalding my tongue. "It's been challenging," I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. "But Dr. Evans was very helpful." I saw Michael's slight, approving nod from across the table. I was saying the right lines. Patricia stayed for hours, a seemingly casual visit that was anything but. She played with the children, her laughter a little too loud, her compliments for Michael a little too effusive. "You're such a wonderful father," she gushed as he lifted a giggling Sarah into the air. "And this house, you keep it so beautifully, Michael." It was a masterclass in subtle erosion, reinforcing his role as the pillar of the family and mine as the unstable, dependent variable. When Sarah needed a diaper change, I seized the opportunity to escape to the nursery upstairs.
As I laid her on the changing table, my hands trembling as I fastened the fresh diaper, I heard their muffled voices from the kitchen below, the low rumble of Michael's voice and Patricia's sharper, punctuating tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. They were building a case against me.
After Patricia finally left, enveloping me in a perfumed, suffocating hug and whispering, "You get some rest, dear," the atmosphere in the house shifted. Michael was buoyant, confident. The cavalry had arrived and affirmed his position. He decided we should have a family movie night, a celebration of our return to normalcy. As we sat on the sofa, Timmy curled between us, watching a cartoon, Michael's arm was draped around my shoulders, a heavy, possessive weight. I felt like I was suffocating. The movie was a blur of color and noise. All I could think about was the Ziploc bag hidden in the bathroom and the increasing urgency thrumming in my veins. His plan was crystallizing, and if I didn't move soon, I would be medicated into docility, surrounded by people who saw me as a problem to be managed. Later that night, long after the children were asleep and Michael was snoring softly beside me, I lay awake, the digital clock on my bedside table casting a faint red glow. 2:17 a.m. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. I replayed the hotline advocate's words: gather important documents, stash cash, have a bag ready, know your route. I had the documents. The cash was the problem. Michael controlled all our finances. He gave me a grocery allowance and every receipt was scrutinized. The prepaid card only had a few dollars left on it. I needed money, and I had no way to get it. Despair began to curl its cold fingers around my heart. But then I remembered something. Patricia. In her fussing earlier, had left her purse on the counter for a moment when she went to use the restroom. It was a reckless, dangerous thought, one that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. But it was also a possibility, a terrible, shameful possibility that represented the only lifeline I might get. The following Monday, when Michael was at work and the children were occupied, I would have to make a choice. I would have to decide what lines I was willing to cross to save myself and my children.
The weekend stretched into an eternity of forced smiles and simmering terror, every moment under Patricia's watchful eye or Michael's possessive touch feeling like a test I was doomed to fail. By the time Monday morning arrived, the air in the house felt thick enough to choke on. Michael left for work with a lingering kiss on my cheek, a performative gesture for the benefit of the neighbors he imagined were watching, and the moment his car disappeared down the street, a frantic energy seized me. I got Timmy ready for school, and Sarah settled with her toys, my movements efficient and robotic, but my mind was a whirlwind. The plan I had hatched in the dark hours of the night was reckless, maybe even stupid, but it was the only one I had. After dropping Timmy off, I drove to the grocery store, my usual Monday routine, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pushed the cart through the brightly lit aisles, filling it with the mundane items of our life: bread, milk, bananas, a perfect portrait of normalcy. But my eyes kept darting towards the pharmacy section at the back. I needed a bag, something nondescript and sturdy, something I could hide quickly. I found a simple black duffel bag tucked away on a bottom shelf between beach towels and travel pillows. I tossed it into the cart, my pulse leaping into my throat as if I'd just shoplifted it. At the checkout, I held my breath, but the cashier scanned it without a second glance. It was just a bag, but to me, it was a vessel for my freedom. Back home, with Sarah napping, I carried the groceries and the secret duffel bag inside. The silence of the house was deafening. I unpacked the food first, putting everything away in its proper place, maintaining the order Michael demanded. Then I took the duffel bag and went upstairs to the attic, the one place he rarely bothered to go.
Kneeling on the dusty floorboards, surrounded by Christmas decorations and forgotten baby clothes, I opened the bag. This was it. This was the tangible beginning of my escape. I started with the documents from the tampon box, the Ziploc bag containing our identities feeling heavier than lead. I placed it carefully in the bottom of the duffel. Then I went to the children's rooms. I selected a few changes of clothes for each of them, practical items, things that wouldn't wrinkle easily, and added them to the bag. For myself, I took only the barest essentials from the back of my closet: jeans, a few plain shirts, underwear, nothing he would notice missing. Each item I packed felt like a betrayal of the life we had built, and yet, with every zipper closed, I felt a fraction lighter.
The hardest part was yet to come: the money. I stood at the top of the attic stairs, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I thought about Patricia's purse, left unattended on my kitchen counter. I thought about the wallet inside, probably thick with cash. She always carried cash. The shame of the thought burned my face. I was a woman who returned shopping carts to the corral, who volunteered at the school library. I wasn't a thief. But then I heard the echo of Michael's voice in the police station, the dismissive smirk of Officer Davies, and I saw the phantom of that pink rose on my counter. I wasn't just a woman anymore. I was a cornered animal, and cornered animals do what they must to survive. I crept back downstairs, my socked feet making no sound on the carpet. Sarah was still sleeping. The house was still. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes going directly to the spot where Patricia's purse had been. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. She had taken it with her when she left. The brief, desperate hope I'd nurtured collapsed, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I was back to square one, with a half-packed bag of freedom and no way to fuel the journey. I slid down the kitchen cabinet onto the cold tile floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The tears came then, silent and hot, of frustration and fear. How could I be so naive? How could I think it would be that easy? I sat there for a long time, until the chill from the floor seeped into my bones. I had to get up. I had to make lunch for Sarah. I had to pick up Timmy. I had to be Linda. I pushed myself up, wiping my face with the back of my hand. As I stood, my eyes fell on the little orange prescription bottle on the counter, the one Michael had so proudly filled for me. The medication meant to sedate me into submission. An idea, dark and twisted and born of utter desperation, began to form in my mind. I couldn't steal cash from Patricia, but perhaps I didn't need to. Perhaps there was another way to get money, a way that involved not stealing from my enemy, but selling the very poison he was forcing down my throat. The thought made me sick to my stomach, but as I looked at the bottle, it no longer represented my captivity. It looked for the first time like a currency. The orange plastic bottle felt cold and sinister in my hand, a tiny prison for little white lies that were supposed to smooth my edges into something more manageable for my husband. Selling them? The thought was so foreign, so desperate, it felt like I was contemplating cutting off my own arm to use as a weapon. But the image of Timmy's face, so serious when he asked if Daddy was still mad, flashed behind my eyes, and the moral lines I'd held on to my entire life began to blur and shift. What was the greater sin, selling a medication I never wanted, or staying and letting my children grow up thinking that love looked like flinching and whispered apologies? I unscrewed the cap and poured a few of the pills into my palm. They were innocuous, small. I had no idea how to even begin, who to ask, or what they were worth. The recklessness of the idea terrified me, but the alternative, a slow, medicated erosion of my will, terrified me more. I was still standing there, the pills a small white mound in my sweaty palm, when the doorbell rang. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent house. My heart leapt into my throat, and I fumbled, scattering the pills across the kitchen floor. They skittered under the table and the refrigerator, tiny white beetles of shame.
For one wild, paralyzing second, I thought it was Michael, that he'd come home early and caught me in the act of my betrayal. But his key would have turned in the lock, he wouldn't have rung the bell. I scrambled to pick up the visible pills, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp them, shoving them back into the bottle and screwing the cap on with frantic twists. I shoved the bottle into the junk drawer, just as the bell rang again, more insistent this time. Smoothing my hair and my expression, I went to the door and opened it a crack. It wasn't Michael. It was Carol, my next-door neighbor. Carol with her perfectly highlighted bob and her friendly, inquisitive eyes that missed very little. "Linda, hi! I saw your car was here. I was just wondering if you wanted to come over for a cup of coffee," she asked, her smile bright and welcoming. My first instinct was to say no, to retreat back into the dark planning of my escape, but something stopped me. Carol was normal. She lived in a world where husbands didn't throw plates and wives didn't contemplate selling prescription drugs. For a few minutes, maybe I could borrow that world. "Sure," I heard myself say, my voice strangely hoarse. "That would be nice. Let me just get Sarah." Sitting at Carol's sun-drenched kitchen table, a place so different from my own, with its cheerful yellow walls and thriving potted herbs on the windowsill, I felt like an imposter. I sipped the excellent coffee she'd made, the normalcy of the gesture almost painful. We made small talk about the kids, about the new landscaping the homeowners association was proposing, and all the while I could feel the weight of the junk drawer in my own house, just across the driveway, pulling at me. "You've been quiet lately, Linda," Carol said gently, topping off my mug. "Is everything okay?" It was the question I both dreaded and longed for. The words, "No, it's not, my husband is a monster and the police think I'm crazy," perched on the tip of my tongue, a desperate confession. But I remembered Officer Miller's dismissive eyes. I remembered Patricia's calculating sympathy. Could I trust Carol? Or would my truth become just another piece of neighborhood gossip? A story that would eventually find its way back to Michael, giving him the final proof of my instability he needed. I forced a smile, the same one I'd given Patricia. "Just tired, you know. Sarah isn't sleeping through the night again." It was a safe, mom-appropriate excuse. Carol nodded sympathetically, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt? Concern? That told me she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, you know I'm right here if you need anything," she said, and her hand briefly covered mine on the table. It was a simple gesture of kindness, but it undid me. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I had to look away, blinking rapidly. In that moment, I wasn't a would-be criminal or an unstable wife. I was just a woman, desperately lonely, being offered a lifeline of simple human kindness. It was almost more than I could bear. I made an excuse about needing to start dinner and fled back to my own house. The contrast between her warm, bright kitchen and my cold, silent one hitting me like a physical blow. As I closed my door, leaning against it, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Michael. "Running late. Don't wait on dinner." The reprieve was small, but it was something. It was time. I had to find a way to turn those little white pills into a ticket out of here. The text from Michael was a gift, a sliver of time I hadn't expected. The silence of the house, which usually felt so oppressive, now felt like an ally. I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the junk drawer, my fingers closing around the cool orange plastic of the pill bottle. It felt like holding a live wire. I couldn't do this here, in the open. I took the bottle and my phone and locked myself in the bathroom again, the only sanctuary I had. Sitting on the cooled tiles, my back against the door, I stared at the bottle. How does one even begin to do this? I didn't know the underworld of my own suburban town. I was a PTA mom, not a drug dealer. The absurdity of it all threatened to bubble up as hysterical laughter. I opened my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed vague, desperate search terms into a private browser. how to sell prescription medication, anxiety pills value. The results were a confusing mix of legal warnings and shady, coded forum posts that made no sense to me. I felt a fresh wave of hopelessness. This was impossible. I was in over my head. I was about to give up, to flush the pills and resign myself to my fate, when I remembered a woman, Brenda. She worked the night shift as a cashier at the 24-hour convenience store off the highway, the one I sometimes stopped at for milk when I'd forgotten it during the day. She had tired eyes and a sleeve of tattoos, and I'd once seen her in the parking lot, having a hushed, intense conversation with a man who handed her a wad of cash before speeding off. At the time, I'd judged her, tucked safely in my minivan. Now I saw her as a possible lifeline. It was a colossal risk. She could say no. She could call the police. She could tell Michael if he ever happened to stop in there. But it was the only name, the only face I could attach to this terrifying endeavor. I had to try. The plan formed in fragments, fueled by a fear so potent it sharpened my thoughts into fine points. I would tell Michael I was going to the late-night supermarket, that Carol had mentioned a sale on diapers. It was flimsy, but it might work. I waited until the sky outside turned indigo, until I heard Michael's key in the lock. I practiced my smile in the reflection of the microwave door. He came in, looking tired but satisfied, and dropped his briefcase by the door. "Long day," he grumbled, heading straight for the liquor cabinet. This was my moment.
"I'm just going to run to the store," I said, my voice carefully light. "Carol said they have a great deal in diapers at Supermart. I won't be long." He poured himself a scotch, not even looking at me. "Fine. Don't wake the kids when you get back." The dismissal was a blessing. I grabbed my purse, the pill bottle a heavy secret in the inner pocket, and fled out the door before he could change his mind. The drive to the convenience store felt surreal. Every set of headlights behind me felt like a police car, every stoplight an eternity. I pulled into the poorly lit parking lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw Brenda through the window, leaning against the counter and scrolling through her phone. I sat in the car for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to muster a courage I didn't feel. This was the point of no return. Once I did this, there was no pretending I was the innocent victim anymore. I was becoming an active participant in my own war. I finally forced myself to get out and walk inside. The bell on the door jingled, a sickeningly cheerful sound. Brenda looked up, her expression bored. "Help you?" she asked. I approached the counter, my legs feeling like rubber. There was no one else in the store. It was now or never. I pulled the pill bottle from my purse and slid it across the counter towards her, my hand shaking so badly the plastic rattled. "I need money," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I was wondering if if there's any way—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. Brenda's bored expression didn't change. She picked up the bottle, looked at the label, and then back at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. She recognized me, the nice mom from the minivan. She held my gaze for a long, terrifying moment, and I was sure she was going to call security, call the police, call someone. But then she simply said, "50. My heart plummeted. $50? It was nothing. It wasn't enough for a tank of gas, let alone a new life. But it was something. It was a start. I nodded, a frantic, jerky movement. "Okay," I breathed. She reached under the counter, pulled out a crumpled $50 bill, and slid it across to me, palming the pill bottle in one smooth motion. The entire transaction had taken less than 10 seconds. I snatched the bill, shoved it into my pocket, and turned to leave, my entire body trembling. "Hey," Brenda said, her voice low. I froze, my hand on the door. I didn't turn around. "Be careful," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And in that moment, I knew that the path I was on was far more dangerous than I had even begun to imagine.
The $50 bill in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the denim of my jeans, a secret so hot I was sure it would set the car seat on fire. Brenda's warning, "Be careful," echoed in my head, not as words, but as a cold chill that had seeped into my bones. The drive home was a blur of panic and paranoia. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like Michael's. Every stoplight was an interrogation. I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles white, trying to steady my breathing. I had done it. I had crossed a line I never knew existed, and there was no going back. The money in my pocket was tainted. It was shameful, but it was also power, a tiny, fragile shred of power that was entirely my own. I pulled into the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs as I saw the living room lights still on. I sat there for a moment in the dark car, trying to compose myself, to shove the terrified woman from the convenience store back into a box and become Linda again, the calm, slightly tired wife. I practiced a smile in the rearview mirror. It looked like a grimace. When I walked inside, the smell of scotch hit me first. Michael was slumped in his armchair, a nearly empty glass in his hand, the television murmuring some late-night news show. He looked up as I came in, his eyes glassy. "You were gone a while," he slurred. My blood ran cold. "The line was long," I lied, my voice coming out surprisingly even. I held up the bag containing a single token box of diapers, "but I got them." He grunted, his attention already drifting back to the television. I escaped to the kitchen, leaning against the counter, letting the tremors I'd been holding back take over. I had gotten away with it. For now. But the close call was a stark reminder of how thin the ice was beneath my feet. The $50 was hidden now, tucked into the Ziploc bag with our documents in the attic duffel bag. It was a start, but it was a pitifully small start. I needed more. The thought of going back to Brenda, of engaging in that terrifying transaction again, made me feel physically ill. But what other choice did I have? The next few days were a lesson in sustained tension. I moved through my life like a ghost, performing all the right actions, making meals, cleaning, smiling at Michael, playing with the kids. But my mind was 1,000 miles away, trapped in that convenience store, feeling the weight of that pill bottle in my hand. I started looking at everything in the house with new, desperate eyes. What could I sell? My wedding ring? It was the most valuable thing I owned, but Michael would notice its absence instantly. My grandmother's silver? It was in a box in the basement, but it was heavy, cumbersome, and how would I explain taking it to a pawn shop? Every idea was fraught with risk, a potential tripwire that could bring the whole fragile structure of my plan crashing down. Then, on Thursday, a crack appeared in the wall Michael had built around me. It was Timmy's parent-teacher conference. Michael, of course, couldn't get away from work. "You go," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "You're better with that sentimental stuff anyway." It was a dismissal, but it was also a gift. An hour alone, outside the house, with a legitimate reason. Ms. Albright, Timmy's kindergarten teacher, was a kind, perceptive woman in her late 50s. We talked about Timmy's reading progress, his sweet nature, his impressive block-building skills. And then she leaned forward slightly, her voice softening. "I have to ask, Mrs. Carter, is everything all right at home?" My breath hitched. "What do you mean?" I asked, my smile stiff. "Timmy has been a little quiet lately, more withdrawn, and in his drawings," she said, gently sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a crayon drawing of our family. Michael was a large red scribble in the center. Sarah and I were off to the side, small yellow circles. And Timmy had drawn himself as a tiny blue stick figure, separated from all of us by a thick black line. A moat. My son had drawn a moat around himself. The air left my lungs. I stared at that drawing, at the desperate, unspoken truth in those waxy lines, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't slowly, carefully save up money from selling pills. My son was building fortresses around his heart in kindergarten. I looked up at Ms. Albright, and I saw genuine concern in her eyes, not the judgment I'd faced from the police or the patronizing sympathy from Patricia. It was a risk, a monumental one, but the drawing in front of me made it a risk I had to take. "Ms. Albright," I whispered, my voice breaking, do you know who I could talk to? A lawyer, maybe? A woman's lawyer? I couldn't say the words domestic violence. Not yet. But she understood. Her eyes filled with a deep, immediate compassion. She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded, reached for a sticky note, and wrote down a name and number. "Eleanor Vance," she said, softly. "She's a friend. Tell her I sent you. She's very discreet." I took the sticky note, my hand trembling, folding it into the smallest possible square and tucking it into the deepest corner of my wallet. It was no longer just about escape. It was about rescue, and I had just been thrown a rope. The sticky note in my wallet felt like a live coal, burning with both terrifying possibility and paralyzing fear. Eleanor Vance. A name. A number. A potential savior who existed only in the whispered recommendation of a kindergarten teacher. For the rest of the day, through making dinner and giving baths and reading bedtime stories, my mind was screaming. I had to call her. But when? How? Michael was everywhere, his presence a constant surveillance. The home phone was out of the question. He'd checked the caller log. My cell phone felt like a tracking device in my pocket. I needed a pretext, a reason to be away from the house, alone, for at least an hour. The opportunity came wrapped in the mundane. On Saturday morning, Michael announced he was taking Timmy to the hardware store for a project. It was a ritual, a way for him to play the role of the handy father, though the projects rarely got finished. "We'll be a couple of hours," he said, ruffling Timmy's hair. Sarah was down for her morning nap. This was it. The moment the car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. I didn't go to the bathroom this time. I went to the backyard, standing in the middle of the lawn where no one could possibly overhear me, the spring sun feeling like a spotlight on my guilt. My hands were so slick with sweat, I nearly dropped the phone. I dialed the number, my heart thudding against my ribs so hard I felt lightheaded. The voice that answered was not what I expected. It was calm, clear, and devoid of the fake warmth I'd come to expect from professionals like Dr. Evans. "Law Office of Eleanor Vance." I stammered. "Hello, my name is Linda Carter. Ms. Albright, Timmy's teacher, she gave me this number." There was a brief pause, the soft click of a keyboard. "I see. How can I help you, Linda?" And there, standing in my own backyard, surrounded by the cheerful chirping of birds and the perfectly manicured flower beds Michael paid a service to maintain, I told my story. It didn't pour out in a hysterical rush like it had with the hotline. This time, it was more of a painful extraction, each word a confession of my own failure, the failure to keep my family safe, the failure to be believed, the failure to leave. I told her about the police, about the rose, about the psychiatrist, about the $50 in my attic. I told her about Timmy's drawing. Eleanor listened without interruption. When I finished, breathless and trembling, she spoke, her voice still calm, but now with a sharp, analytical edge. "What you're describing is a classic pattern of coercive control and psychological abuse with physical intimidation. The police response, while unacceptable, is unfortunately not uncommon. Your husband is building a paper trail to discredit you, Linda. The psychiatrist's report is a weapon. We need to start building your case immediately." She spoke about evidence. She told me to start a secret log, dates, times, specific incidents, no matter how small. She told me to take pictures of any bruises, even old, faded ones.
She told me to try and save any threatening texts or emails. It was overwhelming, an avalanche of instructions that made my head spin. The most important thing right now is safety planning, she continued. This duffel bag, do you have a plan for where you will go? I told her about Haven House, the shelter the hotline had mentioned. Good, she said. Do not wait until you have what you think is enough money. The moment you feel you or the children are in imminent danger, you take that bag and you go. Do you understand? I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Yes, I whispered. The next step is a consultation, Eleanor said. I need to see you in person. We need to discuss filing for a protective order and strategize for custody. Can you get away? I thought frantically. I think I can say I have a doctor's appointment for the medication. He'll believe that. Good. Call me to schedule it when you have a time. And Linda, her voice softened, just a fraction. What you are doing is incredibly brave. Remember that. When I hung up, I felt dizzy, unmoored. I had just hired a lawyer. I had taken the first concrete, legal step toward dismantling my life. The backyard, my prison, suddenly looked different. The high fence wasn't just a boundary anymore. It was a challenge. I heard Sarah stirring from her nap inside, and the sound didn't fill me with the usual dread of facing the day alone with her. It filled me with purpose. I had a mission now, a list of tasks. I was no longer just a victim. I was a client. I was building a case. But as I walked back inside, the cold fear returned, slithering down my spine. I had just declared war on Michael, and he didn't even know it yet. The battle was about to begin, and the battlefield was my own home.
The following week was a secret life lived in the shadows of my real one. I became a spy in my own home. My phone's notes app, a digital ledger of my suffering. March 14, 7:32 p.m. Argument over unpaid bill. Called me useless. Punched wall next to my head. Left fist-shaped dent in drywall. I took a picture of the dent when Michael was in the shower, the flash of blinding burst of guilt in the dim hallway. March 16, 10:15 a.m. Text message. If you can't even keep the kids quiet while I'm on a call, what good are you? I screenshotted it, my heart aching with the familiar shame. Each entry was a piece of my soul, packaged as evidence, and the act of documenting it somehow made the abuse feel both more real and more surreal. I was curating a museum of my own misery. The appointment with Eleanor Vance was set for Tuesday afternoon. I told Michael I had a follow-up with Dr. Evans to adjust my medication, and he had merely grunted his approval, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Walking into her office, a modest but elegant suite in a building downtown, felt like crossing into another dimension. It was quiet, orderly, safe. Eleanor herself was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. I handed over my phone, showing her the log and the pictures. She reviewed them in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me. This is good, Linda. This is a start. The text messages are particularly useful. It demonstrates a pattern of denigration and intimidation. We talked for an hour. She explained the process of filing for a protective order, the legal hurdles we might face, and most terrifyingly, the likelihood of a bitter custody battle. He will use the psychiatrist's report against you, she said bluntly. He will claim you are an unfit mother, unstable, a danger to the children. We need to be prepared for that. The thought of anyone, let alone a judge, thinking I would ever harm my children was a physical pain in my chest. What do I do? I asked, my voice small. We fight, Eleanor said simply. We get your own psychological evaluation from a neutral party. We gather character witnesses. We prove that his behavior, not your alleged instability, is the source of the danger in your home. She outlined a plan, a roadmap through the legal labyrinth that both terrified and electrified me. This was real. This was happening. As I stood to leave, she handed me a folder. Read this. It's information on Haven House. Memorize the address. Don't take the paperwork home. I took the folder as if it were made of glass, tucking it into my purse beside the diapers I'd bought as my cover story. The drive home was a haze of conflicting emotions, a fragile hope now tethered to the concrete anchor of a legal strategy, and a bone-deep fear of what would happen when Michael discovered the war I was preparing to wage. I walked back into my house, the familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner and something simmering in the crock pot wrapping around me, a deceptive cocoon of normalcy. Michael was in the living room. "How was the doctor?" he asked, not looking away from the television. "Fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He said the medication should start helping soon." It was the right thing to say. He nodded, satisfied. I went to the kitchen to put the diapers away, my whole body trembling with the adrenaline of the lie and the meeting. I had just taken another step, a giant one, on the tightrope. But as I placed the diapers on the shelf, my eyes fell on the junk drawer. A cold dread washed over me. The pill bottle. I hadn't thought about it in days, consumed by the log and the lawyer. What if he decided to check how many were left? What if he noticed the bottle was significantly emptier than it should be? The $50 in the attic suddenly felt like a beacon, a piece of evidence that could unravel everything before it even began. I had to get rid of the bottle. But how? I couldn't just throw it in the kitchen trash. He would see it. The recklessness of my act at the convenience store came crashing down on me, a new and terrifying variable in an already impossibly dangerous equation. My secret life was beginning to have its own, unpredictable consequences. The smell of meatloaf from the crock pot, usually a comforting aroma, now made my stomach churn. The pill bottle. I had to get it out of the junk drawer. It was a ticking bomb, sitting there amid the spare batteries and tangled charging cords. My mind raced, searching for a solution as I mechanically set the table. I could feign illness, say, I accidentally dropped the bottle in the toilet while getting a glass of water, but that would require a performance, and I was so tired of performing. I decided on simple, brazen theft. I would take the bottle and dispose of it somewhere far from the house, somewhere it could never be linked back to me. The risk was immense, but leaving it there was an even greater one. After dinner, as Michael settled in front of the television, I saw my chance. "I'm just going to run the recycling out to the bin," I said, gesturing to a small pile of cardboard. He gave a non-committal grunt. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs as I swept the pile into a box, making sure to noisily crumple some paper. With my body blocking his view, I pulled open the junk drawer, my fingers closing around the familiar orange cylinder. I slipped it into the pocket of my hoodie, the plastic pressing against my hip like a brand. I carried the box outside, the cool night air a shock on my flushed skin. I didn't just toss the bottle into the recycling. I walked to the far end of the yard, to the large black garbage bin that wouldn't be collected for another 5 days. I lifted the heavy lid, the stench of decay wafting out, and I buried the bottle deep inside, under coffee grounds and soiled diapers, a fitting grave for the poison he'd tried to force into my life. I stood there for a moment, in the darkness, breathing deeply, feeling a small, grim sense of victory, one less weapon in his arsenal. But when I walked back inside, the victory felt hollow. Michael was standing in the kitchen, not in the living room. He was at the sink, washing his glass, but his posture was too still. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. "You were out there a while." My blood ran cold. Had he been watching me? Did he see me go to the garbage bin instead of the recycling? "The bin was full," I lied, my voice tight. "I had to compact it down a bit." He turned then, drying his hands on a towel, his eyes scanning my face, my body, looking for the lie. He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, but the look in his eyes was a promise. He knew I was hiding something. The careful peace we had maintained for days was shattered. The air in the kitchen was charged with a new, more dangerous tension. He didn't need proof. His suspicion was a predator that had just caught my scent. The next morning, the hunt began in earnest. He didn't go to work. He said he was working from home, but he spent the morning drifting from room to room, a silent, menacing presence. He would pick up a knick-knack, examine it, and put it down. He ran his finger along the top of the door frames, checking for dust. He was looking for something, anything, out of place. I tried to go about my routine, playing with Sarah in the living room, but every nerve was screaming. During Sarah's nap, I went to the kitchen to start lunch. Michael was there, leaning against the counter. "You know," he said conversationally, "I was thinking about what Dr. Evans said, about the medication. We should probably check in with him soon, see how it's working." My back was to him, and I froze, the knife poised over a carrot. "Okay," I said softly. "I was thinking," he continued, his voice moving closer, "that I should probably just hold on to the prescription from now on, help you keep track of the dosage. Where's the bottle, Linda?" The question hung in the air, sharp as the knife in my hand. This was it, the confrontation I had dreaded. I turned around slowly, forcing my face into a mask of confused regret. I'm so sorry, Michael," I said, letting my voice waver. "I had it on the counter yesterday when I was making lunch, and Sarah, she was grabbing for it. I snatched it away, but I fumbled. It fell into the sink, right into the disposal. I turned it on without thinking. It was destroyed. I was going to tell you, I didn't want you to be angry." I looked down, playing the part of the clumsy, chastised wife. The lie was a desperate gamble. He stared at me, his eyes narrowed to slits, trying to dissect my story, to find the flaw. The sink disposal. It was plausible. It was domestic. It was the kind of stupid accident he expected from me. He took a step closer, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Destroyed," he repeated, the word a soft threat. "Every last pill?" I nodded, unable to speak. He reached out and cupped my chin, his grip just a little too tight. "You need to be more careful, Linda," he whispered. "We can't have you losing your medication. It's for your own good." He released me, and I stumbled back a step, my heart hammering. He had accepted the lie. For now. But the look in his eyes told me the inspection was not over. It had only just begun, and he would be watching me even more closely now, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for the crack in my facade to widen into a chasm he could push me through. The silence that fell after he released my chin was heavier than any shouting. A thick, suffocating blanket that smothered the entire house. He didn't believe me. I could see it in the cold, flat calculation in his eyes. He had accepted my story about the disposal because it was convenient, because it fit the narrative of the clumsy, unstable wife. But the trust, what little illusion of it had remained, was utterly gone. He became a ghost in my life, a silent, hovering presence. He started coming home for lunch unexpectedly, his keys jangling in the door an hour early, his eyes scanning the rooms, taking inventory. He began checking the mileage on my car, making casual notes in a small book he kept in his pocket. The walls of my prison were not just emotional anymore. They were being physically reinforced, brick by brick, with his paranoia. I had to move faster. The duffel bag in the attic felt both like a promise and a taunt. I needed more money, much more, and I had no way to get it. The thought of going back to Brenda made me sick with shame and fear. But Eleanor Vance's words about imminent danger echoed in my head alongside the image of Timmy's drawing. I started taking smaller, less noticeable things. A silver picture frame from the guest room that had been a wedding gift, a set of crystal wine glasses we never used from the back of the dining room cabinet. I wrapped them in old towels and hid them in the attic bag, a pathetic treasure trove of my freedom. I felt like a thief in my own life, which I supposed I was. I was stealing back the future he had stolen from me. A week after the pill bottle incident, the tension snapped. It was a Tuesday. Michael had been working from home again, a constant, oppressive shadow. I was in the laundry room, folding clothes, trying to breathe in the simple, clean scent of detergent, when I heard his heavy, rapid footsteps on the stairs. My blood went cold. He wasn't just moving, he was hunting. I heard the creak of the attic door opening. My heart stopped. The duffel bag. I had been so careful, but had I left a trace? A footprint in the dust? Had he, in his relentless searching, finally decided to look up there? I stood frozen, a pair of Timmy's tiny jeans clutched in my hands, listening to the sounds from above, the scuff of his shoes on the plywood floor, the rustle of boxes being shifted. Then silence. A long, terrible silence. And then the footsteps again, coming back down the stairs, slower this time, deliberate. He appeared in the doorway of the laundry room, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand, he held not the duffel bag, but a small folded piece of paper. It was a faded, trifold brochure for a bed and breakfast in Vermont. We'd gone there on our honeymoon. I'd tucked it away in a memory box years ago. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something contaminated. "What is this, Linda?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Planning a little trip? Thinking of running away?" My mind went blank with terror. The brochure was harmless, a relic from a past life, but in his eyes, it was a blueprint of my betrayal. It's from our honeymoon," I stammered. "I was just remembering." He took a step into the small room, crowding me against the washing machine. "Remembering," he sneered, "or are you planning a new vacation, one without me?" He was twisting it, using this innocent piece of paper as proof of my disloyalty. This was his genius. He could take anything, any shred of my past or present, and weaponize it. He crumpled the brochure in his fist and threw it at my feet. "I am watching you, Linda. Every move you make, every breath you take, you are not going anywhere." He turned and walked away, leaving me trembling against the humming machine, the crumpled paper a symbol of how he could violate even my most cherished memories. That night, I lay in bed beside him, the space between us a frozen tundra. I knew, with a certainty that was as calming as it was terrifying, that I was out of time. The attic was compromised, his surveillance was absolute. The $50 and my pitiful collection of stolen household goods were all I had. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But as I stared at the ceiling, a new, desperate resolve hardened within me. I couldn't wait to have a perfect plan. I couldn't wait for more money. The next time he left the house, for a meeting, for the gym, for anything, I would take the children and I would go. We would drive to Haven House with the clothes on our backs and the pitiful contents of that duffel bag. We would be penniless and terrified, but we would be gone. The risk of staying had finally, irrevocably, become greater than the risk of leaving. The resolve that solidified in the darkness felt less like courage and more like a final, desperate surrender to the inevitable. I was a cornered animal, and the only direction left to run was through the fire. The next morning, I moved through the routine with an eerie calm, my hands steady as I poured cereal for Timmy and mashed bananas for Sarah. I watched Michael, studying his patterns, looking for the crack in his schedule that would be our doorway to freedom. He was quieter than usual, contemplative, occasionally glancing at me with a speculative look that made my skin prickle. He announced he had a late afternoon meeting across town, one that would be followed by a working dinner with clients. It was the gift I'd been praying for, a window of several hours. The day stretched, each minute an agony of forced normalcy. I packed the duffel bag in my mind, over and over, ensuring I hadn't forgotten anything crucial. Documents, money, clothes, the stolen silver and crystal, my pathetic arsenal against the world. When the time finally came for Michael to leave, he paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He turned back to me, his eyes sweeping over me in a long, assessing look. "You'll be here when I get back," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command, layered with a threat so potent the air in the foyer seemed to thin. I simply nodded, not trusting my voice. He left, and the sound of the door closing was the starter's pistol for the most terrifying race of my life. I didn't allow myself a second to think, to feel. Action was the only antidote to the paralyzing fear. I flew up the stairs to the attic, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I dragged the duffel bag out from this hiding place, the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light like a farewell parade. Down in the nursery, I dressed Sarah in an extra layer, my fingers fumbling with the snaps on her onesie. I packed the diaper bag with every remaining diaper, every pouch of food, stuffing it until the seams strained. Then I went to Timmy, who was watching cartoons in the living room. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice trembling only slightly. "We're going on a special adventure. A car trip. Just you, me, and Sarah. We need to be super quick, okay?" His little face lit up with excitement, and the innocence of his trust was a knife in my heart. 15 minutes. That was all it took. To load the car, to strap the children into their seats, to grab the last-minute essentials, a bag of goldfish crackers, a sippy cup, the worn blue blanket Timmy couldn't sleep without. I stood for a moment on the front porch, my keys in my hand, and looked back at the house. The perfectly manicured lawn, the cheerful red door, the window boxes I'd planted with petunias. It had been my dream once. Now, it was a beautiful shell hiding a rot I could no longer breathe. I took a deep, shuddering breath and got into the driver's seat. I turned the key. The engine purred to life. I put the car in reverse and began to back slowly down the driveway, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Michael's car screeching around the corner. I had made it to the end of our street, my signal clicking as I prepared to turn toward the highway, toward Haven House, toward an unknown future, when my phone, connected to the car's Bluetooth, rang. The screen on the dashboard lit up. It was Michael. My blood turned ice. He never called this soon after leaving. I couldn't answer it. He would hear the road noise, the children, the truth. But if I didn't answer, his suspicion, already a blazing fire, would explode into an inferno. The phone rang again, insistent, terrifying. I had a choice. Answer and lie with a voice I knew would shake, or ignore it and gamble that I could disappear before he realized we were gone. The phone rang a third time, each tone a hammer blow against my sanity. I had to decide. Now. The blaring ringtone was a siren in the quiet car, screaming of his control, his reach, his omnipresence, even when he was miles away. Sarah began to fuss in the back seat, startled by the noise. Timmy asked, "Mommy, who is that?" I couldn't breathe. The green accept button on the dashboard screen glowed like the eye of a predator. To answer was to step back into the cage. To ignore it was to light a fuse on a bomb I might not be able to outrun. With a trembling hand that felt disconnected from my body, I reached out and pressed the button. "Hello?" I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that felt like shards of glass in my throat. "Where are you?" His voice was clipped, cold, devoid of any greeting. There was no background noise. He was still in his car, probably parked, watching us somehow. The paranoia was a vine tightening around my neck. "I'm just running to the store," I said, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my foot hovering between the brake and the gas. "Sarah needed more of that baby Tylenol. She feels a little warm." The lie was instant, a mother's go-to excuse, and I prayed it would be enough. "There's a full bottle in the medicine cabinet, top shelf." The reply was immediate, a trap snapping shut. He knew the inventory of our house better than I did. He kept mental lists of everything. Of course he knew about the Tylenol. My mind blanked. The silence stretched for a beat too long. I must have missed it," I stammered, the facade cracking. "I just thought, with the traffic, it would be easier to just get a new one." It was weak, pathetic. I could feel his suspicion hardening through the phone line. "Turn around and come home, Linda." His voice was low, a quiet thunder that promised a storm. "Now. Check the medicine cabinet. I don't want you wasting money." It was a test, a direct order. To disobey was to declare war. I looked in the rearview mirror at Timmy's confused face, at Sarah's sleepy eyes. The exit for the highway was just 2 blocks away. Freedom was 2 blocks away. If I turned around now, I would never get this chance again. He would lock me down forever. I made a choice. "The connection is breaking up, Michael," I said, raising my voice slightly, layering it with static that didn't exist. "I can't. I'll call you back when I get to the store." And with that, I stabbed the red end call button on the screen. The car was plunged into a silence that was somehow more deafening than the ring. I had done it. I had openly, blatantly disobeyed him. There was no going back from this. I slammed my foot on the gas, the car lurching forward, and I took the turn onto the highway on-ramp, my heart thundering in my chest. I had just jumped off the cliff, and I could only pray that there was something at the bottom to catch us, because the fall was already underway. His silence in that moment was its own answer. It was the calm before the hurricane he would surely unleash. The tires hummed on the asphalt, a steady, hypnotic sound that should have been soothing, but every nerve in my body was a live wire, sparking with a terror so profound I could taste it, metallic and sharp, at the back of my throat. In the rearview mirror, Timmy's eyes were wide, his earlier excitement now replaced by a quiet confusion. "Mommy, why are you driving so fast?" he asked, his small voice trembling. I forced my foot to ease off the accelerator, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Sorry, honey," I managed, my voice strangled. "I just want to get home before it gets too dark." The lie was a bitter pill. There was no home to go to. Not anymore. My phone sat silent and dark on the passenger seat, a dormant volcano. Michael hadn't called back. That was the most terrifying part. His silence was a calculated weapon. He was giving me rope, waiting to see how far I would run before he yanked the noose tight. I drove with one eye on the road and the other on the mirror, expecting at any moment to see his sleek, dark sedan roaring up behind us, cutting me off, forcing us off the road. The 40-minute drive to the next county, to the address for Haven House I had memorized from Eleanor Vance's folder, felt like a journey across a continent. Every red light was an eternity of exposed vulnerability. Every intersection a potential ambush. When the GPS finally announced, "You have arrived at your destination," my heart sank. It wasn't a house. It was a large, nondescript, beige building that could have been an old office complex or a medical clinic. There were no signs, no indications of what it was, just a numerical address and a single unmarked door. This was it, the secret safe harbor. I parked in a spot at the far end of the lot, my body trembling with a combination of exhaustion and residual fear. I sat there for a long moment, just breathing, watching the door, half expecting it to be a trick, for Michael to step out of it. But the door remained closed, the parking lot was quiet. "Are we at the adventure, Mommy?" Timmy asked, his small voice in the stillness. I turned to look at my children. Sarah was asleep, her head lolled to the side, her breath even and peaceful. Timmy looked so trusting, so innocent. They were the reason. They were the only reason. "Yes, baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "We're here." I gathered our things, slinging the heavy diaper bag over one shoulder and hoisting the duffel bag onto the other. I unbuckled Timmy and took his hand, then carefully lifted a sleeping Sarah from her car seat, cradling her against my chest. We must have been a sight, the three of us, stumbling across that parking lot like refugees, which I supposed we were. I pressed the buzzer next to the unmarked door. A moment later, a woman's voice, calm but cautious, came through an intercom. "Can I help you?" I leaned close to the grill, my voice a desperate whisper. "My name is Linda. I was told this is Haven House. I need a place to stay." There was a click, and then the sound of a heavy lock disengaging. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman with kind, weary eyes and a name tag that read, "Gail." She looked at me, at the children, at the fear that was surely etched into every line of my face, and she gave a slow, understanding nod. "Come in, honey," she said softly, stepping aside. "You're safe now." And as I crossed that threshold, the duffel bag bumping against my leg, the weight of my sleeping daughter in my arms,
and my son's small, trusting hand in mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was the simple, staggering cessation of immediate terror. For this one moment, in this silent beige building, we were safe. The door clicked shut behind us, locking out the world, locking out Michael. But as Gail led us down a quiet hallway, the reality of what came next began to dawn on me. The running was over. The hiding had just begun.
The door clicking shut behind us was the sound of the world changing. The hallway Gail lit us down was quiet, lit by soft, warm lights, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile glare of the police station or the tense, shadowed rooms of my own home. She showed us to a small room with 2 single beds and a crib, its simplicity more beautiful to me than any palace. I laid Sarah in the crib, her little body sinking into the mattress, still deep in the oblivious sleep of infancy. Timmy, overwhelmed and exhausted, curled up on one of the beds and was asleep almost instantly. I stood there in the silence, watching my children sleep in safety, and the dam inside me finally broke. I cried, silent, heaving sobs that had been stored up for years, tears of grief, of fear, but also, for the first time, of a fragile, burgeoning hope. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and whispered conversations with the other women in the shelter, their stories mirroring my own in their terrible, familiar rhythms. With Gail's help, I contacted Eleanor Vance. The legal machinery began to turn, slowly, grindingly, but it turned. Eleanor filed for an emergency protective order, and with the evidence from my secret log, the photos and the testimony of Miss Albright about Timmy's drawing, it was granted. Michael was served. His response was a fury I could only imagine, but it was now contained by the law, a wall he could not punch through. There was a hearing. I had to face him in court. He sat across the room, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it chilled the air. He had a lawyer, a slick, expensive man who tried to paint me as an unstable, manipulative woman who had abandoned a loving home. But Eleanor was a fortress. She presented our evidence, piece by piece, building a wall of truth that his money and rage could not breach. The judge, a stern-faced woman, listened intently. When she upheld the protective order and granted me temporary sole custody with Michael's visitation to be strictly supervised, the air rushed from my lungs in a dizzying wave of relief. It wasn't over. The divorce and the final custody battle still loomed, but we had won the first, most critical battle. We were safe, and the law now saw him for what he was. Weeks turned into months. We moved from the shelter into a small, rented apartment with help from a community program. It had thin walls and outdated appliances, but it was ours. The first night there, as I tucked Timmy into his own bed, in his own room, he looked up at me and said, "I like our new house, Mommy. It's quiet." That simple sentence was the greatest reward I could have ever received. Sarah learned to walk in that apartment, her clumsy, joyful steps a celebration of a new life. I found a job as a receptionist at a local dentist's office, the first money I had ever earned that was entirely my own. It wasn't much, but it was a foundation. I never saw Michael alone again. The few supervised visits with the children were tense and brief, and eventually he stopped coming, his pride seemingly unable to bear the scrutiny. The divorce became final on a Tuesday. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a signature on a piece of paper that legally dissolved the life I had once known. I kept the name Carter. It was my children's name, and I had fought too hard for them to let it go. One afternoon, almost a year after we had fled, I was planting marigolds in a small window box outside our apartment. The sun was warm on my back, and I could hear Sarah babbling inside. Timmy was at school. My phone, now a tool of my own choosing, buzzed. It was Carol, my old neighbor. We'd kept in touch, tentatively. "I thought you should know," she said, her voice gentle. "Michael sold the house. He moved away, somewhere out of state." I thanked her and hung up. I stood there, my hands buried in the rich, dark soil, and I felt nothing.
No fear, no anger, no regret. Just the sun on my skin and the simple, profound peace of the present moment. The ghost was gone. The war was over. The life we had now was built not on dreams, but on survival, on resilience, on the quiet, fierce love of a mother for her children. It was a life with scraped knees and bills to pay, with worries about school projects and the price of milk. But it was ours. It was real. And as I pressed the last marigold into the soil, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that we were going to be all right. We were already more than all right. We were free.